Hello, and today I'm with Sarah Smith. She is running for the Ninth Congressional District in Washington, and she is a Democrat, and she has the endorsements of Justice Democrats and brand new Congress, and I'm glad that she's here speaking with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yes, and I first heard about you in your race when you made your appearance a couple of weeks ago now on the Young Turks rebel headquarters, and you said a lot of things during that brief interview that I think that's why I reached out, that we definitely go in more detail and talk about, because there are a lot of interesting things going on, especially with your opponent as well. And the first thing I wanted to jump into is the Voter Access Network, or VAN, in Washington. And could you explain that and any updates that you might have with what's going on in Washington right now?
Sure, absolutely. So a bit of background on why Voter Access Network is so important. So in the state of Washington, we actually don't register for parties when we register to vote. We actually have open primaries or jungle primaries. So when you get your ballot in the mail, you can vote for whoever. If you're a registered Republican, you're going to see all the candidates on the ballot. If you're not registered and you're registered as an independent, then you can see all the candidates, and everyone can see everybody. And at the end of the primary, the people with the top two who gross the most votes in the primary move on to the general. So that means it can be two Democrats, a Democrat and a Republican, an independent and a Republican, two Republicans, whoever the top two winners of the primary move on to the general. So because we don't register to vote with parties, van access is really critical to grassroots organizing efforts down here, because canvassing is a really big deal for the grassroots movement. Going out, knocking on doors, meeting with likely voters, meeting with voters that align with our party, meeting with progressive voters, being able to go out and make that contact with them is critical to being viable in any kind of race. So the Washington State Democratic Party has all the VAN network and the VAN information. So they have all the information for the last four elections, major midterm and presidential elections. And when we reached out to them and asked for access to it, they told us that we couldn't have it because there's a bylaw that says to get access, we have to be endorsed by 50% plus one of the legislative districts. I like to read the language of these bylaws. So as we started to progress more, and we found out that most of the legislative districts either don't endorse till after the primary, or they don't endorse until May, which doesn't leave a grassroots campaign a whole lot of window in order to move forwards and try and make these canvassing efforts happen. I reached out and I asked for a copy of the bylaw. A number of our volunteers did too. And that's when the Washington State Party clamped down really, really hard on the VAN information. So they wouldn't provide us a bylaw. They wouldn't provide us VAN access. They wouldn't provide us a denial, so we could go use a third-party tool called Target Smart. And they basically stopped working with us and providing us information we requested. We actually reached out to some legislative districts and some counties. Their chairs reached out to the state party and said, hey, where's this bylaw? We had vice chairs reaching out saying, what are you talking about? What bylaw? And nobody could be provided this mysterious, elusive bylaw by the state party. And a couple of weeks ago, I actually found out that they changed their reason again for why they're not giving us VAN access. They now say it's because we're endorsed by brand new Congress, and brand new Congress endorses Republicans, which puts their data at risk. And I find this moved goalpost very suspect, because there's no bylaw still. There's no new bylaw for this new reason they're giving us. And my incumbent, actually, we poured over his FEC records, as you do when you're running for office. And he's donated to Republicans before. So I don't understand why it's okay for my incumbent to donate to Republicans, but because I'm endorsed by a bipartisan organization, I don't qualify for access. So we're still fighting with them. We haven't had too much movement on them. Tina Podladowski is the state chair. She's kind of pretending that it's not happening, but we've been working really, really closely with a lot of the progressive counties in the area, a lot of the progressive legislative districts. We've been very in contact with them. I know that there's a few people that are working on a resolution. We're actually working on one too, that would separate campaign tools from endorsements, which basically means they won't be allowed to predicate our access to VAN on our endorsements. So we are working on bringing that up on the 27th state convention, which is happening in Bellingham. So we're still working on it. We're still fighting them. To me, it's important to keep this fight going, because VAN access and access to that data is really critical, especially for candidates that are running grassroots or that are running grassroots campaigns like this one. And if we can make the process a little better for someone to come after us, that's something that I feel like our campaign has an obligation to do. So we're still fighting with them over it. We're not giving up. Just because we're not in the muck with them all the time doesn't mean we've stopped caring about it or stopped working on it. We're definitely still pushing for it. Now we're pushing to make it an official resolution, hopefully, if they listen to us at the January 27th meeting. But I'm happy to go back in 3 more months and do it again. So I'm a pretty dogged person. I'm not going to let the bone go pretty easily.
Yeah, that actually was leading into my next question, because this sounds very suspect legally, because if there is no legal precedent for them to restrict access to the voter access network, it sounds like a lot of qualms there that they might be doing something illegal. And the primary is August 7th, correct?
Yes.
So the longer they push this out, the more difficult they're going to make it for grassroots campaigns, which benefits Adam Smith, who is an incumbent and already has, I believe it's over $300,000 cash on hand to use for a House seat, which is an absurd amount of money for a House seat when you really look at it. And so even with these restrictions right now, without having Van, Washington is one of the most progressive states in the union, and it was overwhelmingly the caucuses went for Bernie Sanders. And is it as difficult as it would be in Washington as it would be in a state like North Carolina, where I'm currently at, or since it is such a blue state?
It It is and it isn't. So there are still challenges. They're just very different. So the challenges in North Carolina of a Democrat running for a seat, you have to be a little more hands-on and a little more face-to-face. But in a very blue district, we don't have as much of a risk of a Republican swooping in and taking the seat. Typically, they only take about 23% during the primaries of the vote. And that's actually been shrinking over time. And our district, the 9th district, caucused about 72.1% in favor of Bernie Sanders. This was one of my criticisms of my incumbent, of Adam Smith, no relation. He super delegated for Hillary Clinton, despite the fact that his district swung so hard for Bernie Sanders. And his justification for this was, just to paraphrase, was essentially, I don't have to do what the people want. It's more important that I listen to the will of the party and I don't go against them. And that sat really ill with me, because we're a really progressive district. We're very blue. We swung really hard for Bernie Sanders. We come about 75, a little shy of 75% blue and Democrat. And we're very democratic, very progressive, very dark blue, very young district. And so for him to say that he wasn't going to listen to us in this one instance because of the party nationally, it was pretty disappointing. We've got Pramila Jayapal. We're known for being a little upstarty up here in Washington. So he had every opportunity to stand up and actually be the progressive voice for his progressive district, and he chose not to. And so that's been a big criticism of mine against him. But as far as our challenges are concerned, I think our challenges are really, people are always wary of a newcomer to the political scene. I think that's pretty much across the board. And that's been one of the most contentious things for us. But by and large, the district has been really, really excited about our run. I've talked to people who are sitting chairs in their counties. I've been in contact with a lot of the county executive boards that are part of the state party. And a lot of them have come out and said, good, I'm glad you're running against him. Every time we go knock doors, people are like, perfect, just like Bernie Sanders. Yes, of course, give me your card. They're excited. So it really is, for us, our biggest challenge, I think, is just getting our name out there. And sharing the same last name with my incumbent has its advantages because I really only need 50% of the name recognition, right? So that's been our biggest push, is for name recognition. So we can actually get out in the community and have people see us on the ballot and say, oh, that girl, I remember her. She's the fiery redhead that talks a lot and came to my door, wouldn't leave me alone about politics. And that's kind of what our big challenge is over here. So it's a little different than North Carolina. It's mostly just getting out into the community, explaining our platform to people, because either way, this district is pretty solidly blue. We just have to leave it up to the people.
I think we might be having more technical issues. I'm not positive.
Oh, sorry about that. My computer crashed briefly, but that's okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah, everything was like, oh, what's it? It's froze.
Yes, no, that was my computer crashed, but it's fine. I can use my phone for now. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, yes.
Wonderful.
So that was fun. Anyway, so yes, essentially that's kind of what's going on. So we're really more about getting the message out about our campaign, getting name recognition. So those are our biggest challenges, which are a little bit different than I know the challenges you guys face over there in North Carolina. So
Yeah, that's when you were getting into that. That seems, but he really seems like he has an uphill challenge for an incumbent. 72% for Bernie Sanders, and that means your district is heavily progressive. And just going into just a little bit about his campaign donations, which uh, it really I won't even say that I did great work finding this because you just search any kind of FCC funds for 4 minutes, you'll find defense contractors, all of them.
oh yes.
Just just in the past couple of years alone, just from the past 3 years alone, he has well over $300,000 of campaign donations from defense contractors. Most of that is from PACs. Actually, I would say probably 70% of it is from PACs. And something I found doing research on him just earlier today, Northrop Grumman, they are a global aerospace and defense company, had an issue with a rocket launch, and there's some controversy there. They're one of his biggest donors. I don't expect him to make any comments about that anytime soon. And it just seems that doesn't sit well in a district where people voted for the guy who was saying that if we're going to ever have to use military intervention, it has to be for the right reasons and not just be rushed into because it will make someone money.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, Adam has spoken before where he said that donations don't affect his vote. And I think that's tacitly untrue. And I also think that it's more than that, right? So it's not just about whether or not it affects if you vote yes or no. It affects whether or not you're going to present legislation. It affects whether or not you're going to co-sponsor existing legislation. It affects whether or not you're going to actually speak out when things like that happen. There was an interview with him done recently that says he, in the budget, wants to have allocated funds for the F-35 jet, which, if you know anything about the F-35 jet, it's the most expensive plane in the world that doesn't fly. So they have sunk, I think, something like it's $3 trillion, I think, that we've sunk into that plane. And it's a shared expense that's, I will admittedly, is shared. So the UK has incurred some of this debt, and France and a couple other European Union countries. So we're kind of sharing the cost of this failed plane, but the US has been bearing the brunt of it. And we've been putting in the most. And one of his votes that I saw that I thought was pretty strange was he actually voted in favor of allowing two companies to providing grants that were, I think, about $300 million each for grants to jet companies who to compete to create an efficient or to create a jet engine for a single engine plane. So I was kind of confused why we have two companies competing to make one engine for a single engine plane. I felt like that was kind of a waste of money, but that was a vote that he voted in favor of because the companies that work on those jets are Northrop Grumman, they're Boeing, they're his top donors. So yes, okay, I guess it doesn't affect your vote in some areas, but it affects you no matter what you're going to do. When someone gives you $10,000 every couple of months, you're going to feel indebted to them whether you want to or not, and it's going to affect how you pass legislation, how you talk about legislation, how you interact with legislation. It's going to do more than affect just whether or not you vote yay or nay.
I believe the number he received in 2015 and 2016 combined from Northrop Grumman was $35,400. So he was getting a lot of money from just that one company. I don't know much about your district, but is it that heavily dependent upon defense contractors? I would assume not.
No, it's not actually. So we do have Boeing Field here. We do have some Boeing work here, but Boeing is actually shipping jobs out of Washington in general. So I believe they're slated, or they might have already done so, but they're slated to remove another 600 jobs from our area, which is a huge chunk of work for us. But their biggest plant is actually up in the second district of Washington. And prior to redistricting in 2010, we used to encompass the Air Force Base JBLM down a little bit south of Olympia. So we did used to encompass a military base, but we haven't for some time now, for about 8 years. So we do have a lot of engineers that live in the district, but as far as the businesses that are here, those aren't the businesses that are contributing to our economy anymore. Maybe they used to be, but they're not anymore. And for him to continuously take such an egregious amount of money from them while not saying anything about failed rockets, not saying anything about them moving their businesses out of his district, which was critical to our economy at the time, is pretty frustrating and disheartening. And I think it just shows that there are ways representatives can be out of touch that go beyond just whether or not they support single payer healthcare.
And is this an issue that you feel from canvassing that is important within your district?
I actually do. So there's a twofold issue there. So the first part of that is the money that he takes, right? Coming out of PACs, coming out of political action committees, coming from deep pocketed donors, people connected to the war industry. When we talk about that with people out canvassing, we're actually in the community discussing this. We tell them that my campaign is we don't take any big dollar donations, any corporate PAC money, any special interest or lobbyist money. We don't take any of that. And that piques people's interest. We talk about overturning Citizens United. We tell them about how we're totally a grassroots campaign. So when we discuss Adam's contributions that he's getting from the defense industry, people are pretty surprised and taken aback, and a lot of people are pretty upset. As far as the military industrial complex, we're very progressive up here. We really, really need to end all these unnecessary wars we're in, repeal the authorized use of military force. And these are things that we've talked to people about in the community, and everybody is very strongly in favor of these things. Our district representatives' ties to the military industrial complex are not reflective of the values that we're finding in people when we actually go out and talk to them.
And I think that's extremely interesting because it seems like for all the ratings I saw on the Ninth District in Washington, it's regarded as an extremely safe seat. And it seems like Adam Smith, with like how transparent it is and how quickly you can find the 80% of his uh, donations from the defense packs are literally from businesses like Northrop Grumman and Boeing and companies like that, that he's not worried about his seat. But you did mention earlier that he's recently came out and said that he was a progressive after saying he was a moderate for all these years. And I have a political science background, and those two words don't mean the same thing. I mean, a progressive is to the left of a moderate and to the left of a liberal. So when he says these things, do you feel that it's just him trying to co-opt the conversation so to confuse voters, or do you think that he honestly thinks that he is a progressive?
I think this is actually becoming kind of the establishment hook right now. So what's happening is we're actually seeing a co-opting of language going on pretty much across the board throughout establishment politicians. Adam he's been a self-described moderate for 21 years until his August 7th, 2017 town hall. And I know because I was there when he said, I've always been a progressive. I am a progressive Democrat. When just before on his March 4th town hall, he said, as a moderate, this is what I believe. We need to find the middle ground here. I've been a moderate my whole life. So I actually have recordings of both, but it was very interesting to see the juxtaposition of those two clips side by side, But I think what he's doing is what is pretty common now of establishment politicians trying to hold on to their seats. So he knows he's in a very progressive district. He obviously knows how progressive this district is. He also knows how upset we are over how he super delegated for Hillary Clinton. So in an effort to hold his seat, and as someone who is one of the highest grossing fundraisers for the Democratic National Party, he's trying to hang on to that seat for as long as possible. And a lot of them are doing it by co-opting the language of the progressive movement. So they're saying things like, oh, we need grassroots donors to come out and help us. And oh, we really need to resist, and we need to make sure that we're fighting for progress and progressive value. They use buzzwords like that, even though they don't actually mean what they're pretending to make them mean. What's going on is the establishment representatives and the establishment politicians are trying to take this progressive language and force the definitions to meet what they want them to mean, not change the value system within the party and the establishment itself to reflect those progressive values in that progressive language. So it's kind of a semantic game. And if you're not paying attention, it's really easy to fall prey to it. But it is definitely an attempt to co-opt the language of the progressive movement to try and hang on to power at this point. I think people see through it a lot in this district, especially when you have such a long history with an incumbent representative where they're calling themselves a moderate for so long. People kind of skipped a beat when they heard him say that in the August town hall. I actually saw, I have a supporter who was listening. He actually kind of double taked and looked at me. And that seemed to be a pretty general consensus. So people do see this, and they do recognize it. When you have an incumbent with that long a history, it's hard to pretend that you've been a lifelong progressive who just decided one day that you were going to suddenly fight for progressive values after 21 years.
So you said a couple of interesting things there. I guess the first question I have off of that was his superdelegate vote, did that actually touch a real chord with voters? And the second would be what does being progressive mean for you? Because it definitely seems to mean something that's completely different than what individuals like Adam Smith say it means.
Yes. So for the first part of your question, as far as how he's super delegated, he actually got grilled at some of the legislative districts after he submitted his super delegate vote for Hillary Clinton. He got grilled by our legislative districts for why he did that. There's a big record out there from the 37th legislative district, which is actually my old home district. They're very near and dear to my heart. The 37th they're rowdy, they're progressive, they're intense. I really like them, but they grilled him about it. And so people are upset about it, even within the actual Democratic Party circles in the state of Washington, because he basically went against the will of his voters. He went against the will of his district. And then he said that's not his responsibility to reflect his district. It's more important that he listen to the Democratic National Party. And as far as the second half of your question, what does being progressive mean to me? I think the key meaning in the word progressive is progress, right? So what can we do to make progress? We all know what the problems are. We all know what the issues are. We know that we are a sick country. We know that we're an indebted country. We know that we have an enormous income inequality gap. We know that we're fighting climate change. So we know where the battles are. How can we make progress to fight those battles? Standing up for things that are basic human rights and basic human necessity, like single-payer Medicare for all, like alleviating student debt and providing access to debt-free education, like fighting climate change and investing in green energy. Those all coalesce around that word progressive because it has to do with what we're trying to accomplish. And it's not just about what legislation you co-sponsor. It's about the kind of vision that you have. It's about the kind of country that you know that we can be. You know we can be a country that makes progress for people. We know that we can be the kind of country that preempts these battles down the road. We know we can be the kind of nation that actually sets ourselves up for success in the future and prepares for that future. And that's what being a progressive is. It's not waiting 21 years. It's not waiting till the last minute. It's not dragging your feet. It's reaching out and saying, this bill will help us in 20 years be better. This bill will help us fight climate change. This bill will ensure everyone has access to great quality healthcare. This bill will ensure we don't have another generation drowning in student debt in 20 years. It's about seeing the future. It's about seeing the bigger picture of what's going on and planning for that picture to stay whole for as long as possible. So that's what being a progressive means to me.
That's definitely a strong message to put out there, and I think that it's really important. You did also, when you were on Rebel headquarters, you mentioned about your background, which I thought was extremely interesting because I do have Irish ancestry on my dad's side, And you mentioned that your father, you briefly mentioned about that he helped draft single payer legislation in Ireland. Can you talk a little bit about that, just so whoever sees the video can understand your background and where you come from?
Yes, of course. So my father is he's an immigrant from the United Kingdom. So my dad grew up in post World War II bombing London. He actually has some of his earliest memories are watching the Doodlebug bombs drop on London and destroy his neighborhood. So he grew up in that. He grew up in extreme poverty. He wound up getting a full ride scholarship to Cambridge. He worked his butt off. He worked really, really hard. He joined a couple of firms that were working with the Irish government when they were starting to form their version of the NHS, or the National Health System. And so my dad was part of the legislative consultation committee, or legislative consultation company, that was helping them write out the language and model it after the NHS and set them up for success for a single payer healthcare program. So I didn't know this about my dad until about June of this year, or last year. And so he actually, his name is on a couple of portions of the original document where they it's not the one they submitted for law, but it's the one they submitted to all the politicians to read over and mull over. So his name is actually on that document. But he helped out with consultants who wrote up the bill for it, who wrote up the plan for it, and how it was going to be spent. And another cool fact about my dad, actually, he was also a part of a consulting firm for when the entire country of Jamaica was suing an American shipping company for essentially reducing their prices on banana shipments and trying to basically force worker wages lower. So my dad was actually fighting on behalf of Jamaica and the workers, and they won their case in British court against the American shipping company. But he also helped do that too. So I have a strong background with parents that are very committed to human rights, that are very committed to workers' rights, that are very committed to bridging income inequality gap. I grew up with social obligation drilled into me. It's never been just me. It's never been about how do I get mine. It's always been about how can I help all of us be successful? How can I help everybody have an equitable opportunity? So that's the kind of household I grew up in. Just as a bit of my background.
I don't even know what to follow up with that.
He has a lot of cool stories.
Yeah, that seems like you're extremely politically active, and that also reading more about your background, that you also helped as something I wrote about a couple of months ago. You organized STEM activities for young women, and I think that's something that sticks out, because women are highly unrepresented in STEM fields, and there's really no reason for that, because as we've seen over the past couple of decades, interest is rising for women in those fields, and it's becoming more and more normal, quote unquote normal, whatever that is, in society's terms, for women to be involved in science, technology, engineering, math, video games. All these things are becoming more integrated. And can you talk about that for a bit?
Sure. So I actually helped. I was a volunteer coordinator for both the Ignite Gala, which is Ignite is actually a program that helps young women and young students, and it recognizes their achievements in STEM, and it helps find grants for young women to go into STEM fields, or for young school age young women to go and actually pursue studies in STEM fields. So I actually got to help organize the gala, and I helped do a lot of the direction for their gala. It was really, really fun. And then I also was one of the volunteer coordinators for the ACT-W conference, it's actually specifically focused on connecting women in the technology field. And so it's like a giant networking weekend, pretty much, with workshops, with resume writing workshops. We watch documentaries about women who are actually fighting to be recognized in tech fields. I actually don't have a background. I'm not a woman who works in a tech field. I help manage a mechanic garage in one of the cities down here. But one of the coolest things about it was a lot of the women volunteering for these events didn't have any experience in STEM or in tech. They were just so enthusiastic and so excited about the prospect of helping other women get into these fields, helping other women benefit from these conferences, helping them benefit from these galas, that it was really eye-opening, and it was awe-inspiring. So many of us were one of them was an English teacher. There was me working at my mechanic garage. There was another girl who was a waitress. Most of us didn't have any experience in tech, but we all came together to help build up other women who did have experience in tech. And seeing women come out and step up for each other and volunteer for each other and help each other in a field that we know we're severely underrepresented in, even if we're not in that field, and to just come together and help try and build up this movement to encourage women to become involved was really something else. And the experience of working with both those organizations was just, it was really cool.
And let's say after the end of this process, you become a congresswoman. Is that something you would like to push for more for your district and across the nation? Of course, after things like universal health care and things like that, is that something you would personally would like to author, a bill you would like to author yourself, or something on STEM, increasing STEM funding across the nation?
Absolutely. So, I mean, you have the core tenets of the progressive platforms, especially one like mine, where we're fighting for debt-free education and Medicare for all and single-payer healthcare. But aside from all the major pieces of legislation, that's actually one of the things that I really want to push for is the engagement of young women, especially young women of color, to get involved into tech and provide them opportunities, provide them grants, help set them up with things like fellowships, help set them up with things like apprenticeships. I'd love to have the opportunity to do that. That's absolutely something I want to do, especially in a district that's very heavily technological, that's considered, it's got a very high concentration of communities of color, of immigrant families. Having the ability to fight for the women in those communities and come out and actually help build them up and provide them with the tools and the opportunities to engage in STEM fields and participate and go into these STEM fields. It's part and parcel for our district, right? We're home to, in our area, we've got Amazon, we've got Google, we've got Microsoft. And so having the opportunity to help build women up so they can go and be fearless and conquer these different tech companies and become amazing contributors in the technological field would be awesome to me. My little sister is wonderful at math. She's got a biochemistry degree. She's very smart. I don't get it, but I absolutely, I can't, I have to use my phone calculator sometimes. It's really sad, but she's a math whiz, and she's always felt a little not confident to use her skills as much as I know she could. So the ability to build up someone else's little sister is really important to me, because it's a big deal that women show up for each other, even if we don't necessarily find the same passion in it. Coming out and standing together and fighting for these women that really want to be recognized and go into these STEM fields and tech fields is really important. So as a pet project, absolutely, that's something I really want to do.
And I mean, it's kind of still in the early stages of the race. What is something that you've learned this far, turning back to Adam Smith, or what you learned about your district, or goals that you want to accomplish as you try to win his seat and unseat an incumbent?
I've learned a lot. Actually, I actually just had a conversation with somebody who asked me if you could offer me 6 tips, what would they be? And I was like, can I offer you a dozen tips? Because I have at least a dozen. You really have to be open to trusting people to be as passionate as you are. At first, when I think the biggest thing for me was coming from someone I'm not a trained politician. I don't come from a career politically involved family, but we're not career politicians, or we're not a family with any name that carries any weight or anything. I actually came into this as just a regular person. And so I tried to approach it from the perspective of if I were doing anything else, trying to lean on my personal friendships and be like, hey guys, can you come out and canvass with me? Can you help me do these things? A lot of my friends couldn't or didn't or weren't able to for one reason or another. And at first I let it discourage me. But now that I've built up this team of volunteers that I can trust to handle this campaign with as much care as I do, I actually realize that it's pretty important that my friends kept themselves separate from my political life, because it helps me have an area of my life where I can go to that I can just be my personal self once more. So I can be the person that they know me as. I can just be Sarah Smith. I don't have to be Sarah Smith, candidate for Congress. And it helps me separate the personal and political sphere in my life. And I actually think that's really critical to keeping me balanced as a person and keeping me balanced in my regular everyday life, especially working on top of it. So I think that the biggest thing I've learned is I've learned how to trust people who are as excited as I am. And I've learned how to delegate a lot better to those people and never underestimate them. Because even though we haven't known each other for 20, 30 years, I have volunteers that are working this campaign as hard and as doggedly as I am. And I know without a doubt, if I delegate something to them, it'll get done. So I think learning to open up and trust people that I normally wouldn't be too terribly prepared to trust was a huge thing for me. And so I think it's helped me become a better person. And I actually think it's helped me become a better candidate. And I think it's helped me connect better with the people in my district.
And actually, that also brings up another point. Is Adam Smith present in the district much, or is he in what state? Does he have a home in Washington? Or Washington D.C.? I mean, not Washington. So is he actually out there speaking to his constituents right now, or have you not even really seen him on the campaign trail?
I have. I saw an event with his name on it back in August. Pramila Jayapal was hosting a canvassing event, and then at the bottom it said also Congressman Adam Smith will be there. And that was that was actually the only time I remember seeing him. I know I got an impromptu email about him speaking at a legislative district, but to me that's not the same. A legislative district is not the same as going out in the streets and being at events and going and knocking doors. We haven't really, I personally haven't seen him or heard of him being in the district at all. He has a residence here. He lives his house is in Bellevue, which is actually one of the highest income earning cities in our district. And other than that, though, I think I've seen his name on one event, but it's usually all in an insulated environment. So what I mean by that is he goes to Democratic headlined events. Like he'll go to the state party salmon bake, or he'll go to like a legislative district event or barbecue or something like that, and he'll speak there. But we don't really see him picking up the mantle to go and speak at events where he might have to deal with controversy. So he really tries to shy away from any kind of environment where he'd have to face his audience, because he tends to not take a hard position until he knows what position will resonate with his audience well. And when you're going into an event, like I actually have spoken with Whole Washington, is the state initiative for single payer healthcare we have going on here. I've spoken at a couple of their events. I've talked to people. I've been out there in the community. I've spoken at some progressive events in Southern Washington. I've spoken at some events hosted by Our Revolution King County. So I'm trying to put myself in the position where I have to have these active conversations and talk about my positions and defend my positions with people who might not otherwise feel the same way. And I feel like Adam actually avoids those conversations as much as he possibly can. So we certainly haven't run into him in our district, and I certainly haven't run into him at any events or anything like that. I'm sure it'll happen someday. I'm sure it'll happen in the near future, because right now they're back in session, but I'm sure it'll happen. But we have not seen him out there, so not to my knowledge.
That seemed extremely risky in a district that went 72% for Bernie. Like I can't get that out of my head, and that it all. I guess that also seems a little strange. I guess you can't really answer this, but just putting it out there is that it seems a little bit strange that he's been in that seat for so long. If it's that progressive, I know that the progressive wave has kind of just picked up recently, but he doesn't seem to match the district at all from anything I've read or heard from you tonight. So I think there's going to be a lot more to this race than he probably is expecting right now, especially if he doesn't decide to go talk to people.
Yeah, and that's kind of how we feel. But the thing about the way Adam leads this district is it's actually kind of insidious. He relies on complacency for people, and he does exactly the bare minimum. So he does just enough that people stop asking questions about it. He does just enough that people say, "Oh, well, he did sign on to a freight or some kind of infrastructure bill. He did sign on to an infrastructure bill, but it's an infrastructure bill that focuses on freight and redistributing how it is that we transport freight." And so it doesn't actually address the real problem and the real thing people are concerned about. So he just does as little as he can to inspire complacency. And I think he skates by because people are like, "Oh, he's not that bad." But it's just because he relies on people just being apathetic enough, and he relies on people just being complacent enough that they don't look for him to do more. And he kind of lets Pramila Jayapal, who's in the district right next to us, be the loud, out there, progressive woman. And then he just kind of says, "Yeah, that's what she said." And it's kind of disappointing to watch a 22-year incumbent ride the coattails of a 1-year junior House representative, but that's kind of what's going on. And I think our district deserves more than just complacency. We deserve fire and salt, right? We deserve thunder and lightning. That's the kind of district that we are. 72% for Bernie Sanders. We deserve a lot of noise in Congress. And he's not willing to step up to the plate and rattle cages. He's not willing to dig his heels in and to be an obstructionist for what matters. He's not willing to step up to the plate and take a swing if he's not 100% sure 7 other people have taken a swing first. And I just think that our district deserves more than that. And I think we're better than that. And it's disappointing to watch our representative rely on this history of complacency to skate by and keep his seat for so long.
And I guess that because I guess the last question I'll ask you is about something you said on your website, is that you are a millennial and your district is trending younger. And Adam Smith, I mean, I haven't seen anything that would make him seem that he would be a representative of that demographic. I'm definitely not proposing that age would play a difference in that his ideals don't seem to match. Is that something you've seen coming across other younger people, millennials and post-millennials, that are maybe not quite as involved in the political scene as you would like? Are they interested in hearing more about that because you have a platform similar to that of Bernie Sanders?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think people are really energized about young people entering the political sphere. I think millennials, we like seeing ourselves reflected in our representatives. We like to identify with our representatives. We like to feel connected with them. That's part of what our hope for is, or our new hope for representatives is that we're able to connect with them on a bigger level than just that weird wall that gets put up between politician and constituent. And we kind of want more than that. And so I think seeing someone that's a little younger than our average district age is about 34. Seeing someone that's about that age running for office, that it resonates with people. It engages millennials because they're like, oh, this young upstart. Millennials were so used to being beaten down and told we're ruining everything, and this millennial's doing something. Let's listen to her and see what she's actually got to say. And then once we have the opportunity to talk platform, that's when people really are like, oh, that's like Bernie Sanders' platform. And I'm like, yes, it's very much like Bernie Sanders' platform. And that's when they get really excited, because a lot of millennials very strongly, overwhelmingly actually voted in favor of Sanders during the primary. And so seeing people stepping up and carrying on his platform and his legacy with an energy and enthusiasm and excitement and that's in their age group, that's really engaging a lot of people. And it's giving me a lot of opportunity to talk to people in the district. A lot of the big hook for people is they're like, are you even old enough to run for Congress? And I'm like, yes, I'm 29 years old. I'm definitely old enough to run for Congress. But I've kind of been using that as a good conversation starter because it lets me start to branch off into the platform. But I've been enjoying people's interest in why someone so young would run for Congress. That's actually been a really fun conversation for me to have. But I think it's been opening up a lot of doors, and it's been giving people something different to look to. It's been giving people something else to vote for and to read about and to talk about. Is the young progressive woman who's running against the 22-year establishment Democrat. It's actually giving the race a little bit of life, and I think that's something I didn't expect. And I actually think it's really interesting how engaged people are with the fact that millennials are now starting to run for Congress. I think it's really important that we take our voice back, and it's really important that we find our representation. And it's really important that we have people in our age group to represent us, because right now there's only 5 people in Congress who are 35 or under out of 435 seats. Even though we're the largest workforce, we have the largest debt in the history of the nation, and we're the largest voting pool. We deserve more than 5 seats.
It's hard to argue with that. I actually did not know. I didn't know. I knew it was low. I didn't know it was that low.
Oh yes, it's very low.
That's really low. Yeah. But yeah, I definitely appreciate this, and I would love to have another conversation with you a few months from now to see how things are going, especially with Van. That seems to be something that needs to be taken care of immediately. But I definitely great having a conversation with you, and wish you the best.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time. Definitely. I really would love to talk again. It'd be great.
Thank you.